What's up, photo friends? Phil here with the first editing challenge of 2020. Super excited to be here. With all of our editing challenges, we take a photo, we share it with you, and we see what we all come up with. So you can participate by going to the article page on photographyandfriends.com for this. You might be here right now and download the raw photo below to participate. And once you've done your edit, share it with us to the Facebook group, search for hashtag editing challenge, or look in the announcements and you'll find a post about this one for this month. And share it, comment on other students, let us know what you like, which ones you don't like, and also bonus points for anyone who posts it to Instagram and tags us there as well. If you aren't a member of the group, you get access as a student of ours, and that information will be at the start of the course. So I'm going to jump to the Lightroom and edit myself, and I can't wait to see what you come up with yourself. Cheers. All right, here we are in Lightroom. Here's the photo. It was shot by Nick Atkins. We found this on wesaturate.com. So cool rock climbing shot, nice framing within these rocks, and like all these editing challenges, I'm looking at this photo for really the first time, at least in terms of editing it. So I don't really have a preconceived notion of where I want to go with these photos until I see them. When I see this photo, it's, as I said, a nice composition, interesting shot. I kind of wish that the photographer was a little bit lower so that we can crop out these mats down at the bottom and maybe have our rock climber a little bit more tighter if they were zoomed in or something like that. Of course, though, this is the photo we have, so this is what we're working with. But I say that because while the rock climber is obviously the center of the frame, there are some distracting elements, and she's not for me, very much the highlight of this photo. So I'm just going to go through my basic editing process, and then with the goal for this photo of really highlighting this rock climber in the center right here. Overall exposure is nice. It's pretty flat though. It's you can see here even in the histogram that everything's right in the middle. There's not a lot of darks or shadows and not a lot of highlights. So let's crank up that contrast. I'm going to do that by bringing down, I'm going to bring up our shadows actually, but bring down our blacks just a smidge. Our highlights, we're going to bring up just a little bit. Actually, let's just take our overall exposure up. See, we're just brightening everything up just a little bit, moving that whole histogram over to the right. And then we can play with our highlights just to bring back a little bit of that information we lost from bringing the overall histogram up. If we see the before and after, you can see just a smidge. We might do some adjustment brushes in here to play with the individual part of this photo in a minute. But for now, I think that's an overall good exposure. If we quickly want to boost our contrast, we can use the slider. That kind of is an easy way to do it, or you can get a little bit more particular with what aspects of this photo you want to bring up with the tone curve down here. Now, I sometimes reserve this tone curve for later on in my edit, just sort of as like a final touch. But for now, I think I'm going to just use that to boost that tone, that contrast. As you add contrast, you do add saturation, which is good because that's another thing about this photo. The saturation I felt was a little bit muted. So I'm just going to boost our overall vibrance just a little bit. You know, you can see if I go too far, we start to get a little distortion in the colors with the greens and the blues. Vibrance is great though, because if we use saturation instead, look at those skin tones right there. Not really pretty, bringing up the saturation of everything unless you want to give her a nice spray tan. So vibrance is really my choice of slider for making our colors pop a little bit more. Now, because this is a cool nature shot, sometimes I like to boost clarity quite a bit just to bring out the details in our rocks. And for some sort of action shots like this, it kind of gives that nice sort of stylized, sort of grungy action vibe. And so I think I am going to actually boost clarity. Sometimes I don't, or typically I don't like boosting clarity on people because brings out details that you don't necessarily want. Now, texture is a new slider in some of the recent versions of Lightroom and their updates, and it's another one that sort of brings out texture in things, and it's similar in what clarity does, but it's just another sort of option for bringing out those details. Again, though, I wouldn't use it for skin tones, and I think for this photo, clarity works pretty well. Now, say you want to just go completely opposite, maybe black and white would be pretty cool too, but then I feel like this, our climber here gets lost even more. The first thing I actually tend to do and should do is crop our photo. I think the crop is pretty good, just to focus a little bit more on our rock climber. I might move it up. Maybe let's just play around and say I'm gonna use this for social media. So let's just use a square. And this way we can kind of crop out most of those mats down below. Now you could do some Photoshop work there and actually clone stamp, or even using with our healing brush, we could brush out that really quickly. But the reason I would suggest cropping first is now we don't have to worry about all these rocks and all the mats down there in terms of any of our edits. And sometimes perfectly centering isn't really the right thing to do, so I might just put her down a little bit lower. She's obviously moving up. Well, hopefully she's moving up, not down. And so kind of putting the negative space above her helps make this feel a little bit more balanced. Versus if I did this, this is a different photo. It gives you a different feel. You almost feel like she's hanging off, about to fall. Whereas this one, this crop looks like she's moving upwards. And with that crop, we actually get rid of those mats completely. I would like to make these rocks pop a little bit more. It has this nice red in it. And to bring out that red in those rocks, what I'm going to do is go down to our HSL panel. Under saturation, I'm going to take my eyedropper tool or color picker tool, go to the red here and just drag up. Now, because it is red, sometimes you get some skin tones in that red, and you might not necessarily want that. You can pick this blue there, right there. We can try to decrease the saturation of the green or increase. I actually think decreasing works a little bit for this photo because it's a little bit, not that I don't like the color, it's a little bit distracting. We can even change the color. If we go to hue, take this green and make it maybe a little bit more brown, yellow to kind of match everything. And again, having her pop just a little bit. I think for the reds though, let's just go individually with these sliders, bring out that orange. And again, you see her skin tone starting to, we see her skin tone starting to get a little bit more orange. Right now, to me, it doesn't look unnatural, but you can also play around with the colors using another tool, which is our radial filters or brush filters, and I might do that. So I'm going to take down the orange so we're not getting too crazy there. Detailed, I do notice there is quite a bit of noise here. It's a very sharp image, and I am going to add a bit of noise reduction just to try to smooth out some of those details. Typically, Lightroom will add some noise reduction automatically, but also adding things like clarity will add some noise as well. But I think this here with that about 28 for me looks pretty good. All right, so now let's do some of our other adjustments using first a radial filter. So click that radial filter brush. You create this circle. If you press O on your keyboard, you can see what is going to be affected by your adjustments, which is highlighted in red. You can always invert this as well. So I'm going to do a couple things. So first, I'm going to edit everything outside of her. So press O again so we can turn that off, or you can just check it on and off down here. So I think I'm going to create sort of a natural vignette by dropping the exposure here. I guess that would be an unnatural vignette, but dropping the overall exposure creates this sort of natural vignette. You can also increase the feathering here. I turn this off and on, you can see this feathering increasing. If I increase the feathering, which blends it a little bit more, I'm going to increase the size of this adjustment, so it's not affecting her as much though. So here, let's see, something like that. And a vignette helps because it draws the viewer's eye towards what's in the middle, because what's in the middle is a little bit brighter. Now let's go ahead and see if we play with our color. Just add a little bit of orange. I want it to be like a natural orange, just a little bit. And that's going to affect these rocks here. There's lots of different ways, but that's a quick way to do it. You can also, if you want to just warm things up, you can take your temperature slider up here. I don't think that looks too natural right there, so I'm going to leave that as is. I might boost our texture even more for our rocks, or play around with clarity. Again, I think clarity works better for me here. I just want to see if I bring down our highlights just a little bit more. Our whites just a tiny bit too. Even though we already brought down our exposure, I think that looks pretty good. All right, so if we click done, we can it's good to see our before and after. I'm hitting the backslash button, or you can choose one of these buttons down here to see the before and after, this YY one. The RA is if you have a reference photo. So you can shuffle through these views. So you can see that it's not, let's get to this view. I'm not doing anything crazy. It doesn't look unnatural, but I would say that the rock climber pops a little bit more in our edit so far. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to add a new radial filter. This time, we're going to adjust what's inside the circle. So let's invert this. Now again, you could do this different ways. If you want to, you could use a brush itself and brush over our person and have a more precise adjustment. You could also use your range masks to select a specific color or brightness or darkness, luminance. We have lots of other tutorials in our courses and on YouTube and on photographyandfriends.com for editing in Lightroom if you need help with that kind of thing. So let's just boost our exposure just a little bit. But as we do this, you can see if we go too far, it starts to get really unnatural. So we want to boost our exposure but maintain our contrast. So what we're going to do is boost our exposure, then drop down our shadows a little bit. So we can just delete this one, undo. You can see, just makes it pop just a little bit. I don't want her skin to be too overexposed though. And that's looking pretty good. Let's make that blue pop even more. I think we're going to do that actually back with our basic adjustments. HSL, saturation. I'm going to take our color picker. Just a nice little pop of blue. Again, you don't want to go too far. Just a little bit of pop looks pretty good. Now, if we want to really get in here and do some sort of basically dodging and burning, which is a way to highlight different areas of a photo by darkening parts or brightening parts, we can create a brush here. So take our brush. We're going to drop our overall exposure. You can go super far just to see what you're going to do with this. See how if I paint over her skin like this, you start to see what it's doing. But we can always adjust this. That's the cool thing about Lightroom is it's all non-destructive editing. We're going to decrease our flow. We're going to turn off auto mask, decrease our density. And so what I'm going to do is just go over some of these parts, see where her muscles are really showing. You got the darker parts, and that's really what, makes you see the human form, the muscles, is the light and the dark, the shadows. So I'm just kind of enhancing those shadows down here even on her leg. And because our flow and our density is lower, you might even want to go a little bit lower than what I've set it to. You can basically paint over and over to layer on this effect. So if I press the O button, you can actually see where I'm painting on. So again, just highlighting these parts there. All right. Here. Now this is a little bit of more like a Photoshop retouching effect. It's just a quick way to do it in Lightroom. And I would probably suggest learning how to do this in Photoshop. We actually have a brand new update to our Photoshop course that covers all of these things. You might even want to do a little bit in her hair just to create more of that contrast, which is what can make a photo a little bit more dynamic. That is burning. To dodge, I'm going to click the new brush button. I'm going to increase our exposure. And we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to decrease our flow and density even more. But this time we're going to go over our highlights. So the highlight area is here. On top of her shoulder. And you can use the same sort of brush technique for all sorts of things. I'm using it as a sort of dodge and burn method, but you can use it to smooth skin. We can even do this. You can see how there's a lot of noise in her skin. We might want to even do this overall. And let me press O. Over all of her skin so that it's a little bit smoother, so you're not getting that digital noise, especially because we cropped in a little bit in this photo. Now you don't want to go too far, and sometimes, you get done with this. I'm going to click done, zoom out. I think that actually looks pretty good, but sometimes it's too much, and you just want to bring back down that exposure. See, if I go too far, let's bring this up even more. Let's find our other brush. Was it this one? Yeah, that one. If we bring this down, let's turn off. See, you can go too far pretty quickly, but it really gives you a lot of control at adding definition. You could also play with, instead of overall exposure, bring just down the shadows, which will actually might look a little bit more natural as well, or just a combination of those things. All right, so if we want to remove some of this noise, at least from her skin, what we can do is click new to add a new brush. Make sure you reset all of your settings. You can double click effect to do that. And then we're actually going to increase the noise slider down here, which is actually noise reduction. It's going to add noise reduction. And then I increase my flow and my density all the way up. And I might turn on auto mask and see how that helps us. And I'm going to turn on the mask overlay so I can see where I'm painting on a little bit easier. That auto mask option is doing a pretty good job making sure it's just selecting the skin and not the rock behind, which is what we want. That one got a little bit more of that rock than I wanted. You might have to go over things a little bit, and you can always undo this stuff. You can just click undo, or you can paint off or erase by clicking this button down here. Let's erase here. Let's turn up our flow of our eraser like that. Over here. I mean, these are small details that you wouldn't see if you're posting this to Instagram. But if you are clicking A to get back to our main brush, but if you're printing this out or something, now I didn't even pay attention to this leg down here. So quick adjustments. I would go in a little bit more to fix that, but turn this off. On. I mean, you probably can't even see the difference on your monitor when you're watching the video, but if we increase noise, you see here, if we go back to 0, you can see some of that noise in her arms. Now you don't want to go too far because then it starts to look like everything's kind of like this flat painted on, but kind of cool effect just to smooth out that skin. Now let me do one last thing. I think her hand right here is definitely like a highlight. So I'm just going to create a radial filter. Turn on O. We're going to invert this here. And I'm just trying to think actually what we want to do. Maybe we don't want to invert it and we just want to create, let's turn off noise, create a little bit of a vignette like so. And then what we're going to do is actually erase some of this selection. So starting with our hand, which now we have more focus on our hand, we're going to press O, see what we're at, click brush. We're still in the radial filter, but we have a brush that now we can erase parts of this. So we're going to just erase herself from this so that she's not being darkened. Now, some of this is kind of repetitive. I could have maybe just started with a brush like this. I could have done this just with a brush. I didn't need to start with a radial filter, but sometimes you just kind of start and you go from there. And that's actually looking pretty good. One last, I know I keep going, but this is actually a pretty fun edit. There's the before and after. I think it's looking a lot better. One last thing to sort of really draw in your viewer's perspective or their eye on what's in the center, we can create sort of a blurred vignette. This is definitely more of a stylized thing, so I wouldn't do this all the time. But if we create this circle radial filter around our climber, and then we decrease our sharpness, you can see there that blurs out some of these rocks along the edges and focuses our eye here on our subject even more. So let's see, which one is that? It's this one. You might not want to go too far. And again, you might want to make sure you're not affecting anything that you want in focus. So for example, her hand. So let's take our brush, erase, make sure we're not blurring out any of that area. And maybe you want like this part of the rock right here in focus. Ooh! And maybe you want this part of the rock here in focus. Kind of cool though. So you can play with this idea and go crazy with it. Overall, I'm super happy with this photo. Again, I kind of come back to my tone curve and just, make a couple adjustments, just see if we want even more contrast. Sometimes I go crazy with contrast, and I think everyone kind of tends to do that. But that's looking pretty good. We can see the before and after here. It's a natural edit. It doesn't look completely unnatural, which is what I like about it. And my style, I don't like adding a ton of color filters and that kind of thing. Of course, you're totally able to do that if you want, and that's your style. But to me, this is a natural edit. But I hope that I've accomplished what I set out to do, which is focus the viewer on our rock climber here. Awesome. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial or this edit. I hope to see your work too. And we'll see you in another editing challenge, which happens every month here on Photography and Friends. Cheers.